avoid Samsung TVs at all cost in 2026 is not something I say lightly. I've tested enough screens to know when a company crosses a line, and Samsung crossed it. Hidden failures, silent throttling, and tricks buried in fine print. Once you see what I've uncovered, you'll never look at their TVs the same again. 1. The HDR disaster they don't want you to notice. The first red flag showed up when I was calibrating a 2023 Neo QLED and the HDR brightness started dipping every few minutes. I thought it was a defective unit until I checked online and realized thousands of Samsung owners were complaining about the same thing. HDR is supposed to enhance your experience. Samsung's HDR literally destroys it over time. Why? Because Samsung pushes these TVs right to their thermal limits in store mode. That crazy brightness you see at Costco? That's the TV cooking itself from day one. And once you take it home, the panel can't maintain those levels without overheating. So it cheats. It dims the highlights, crushes the shadows, and forces fake contrast curves, none of which you can shut off. There was a firmware update last year that secretly reduced HDR peak brightness by nearly 20% on multiple models. Overnight. No warning, no explanation. Users woke up to dull picture quality, and Samsung simply said it was improving panel longevity. Translation? They overpromised, underdelivered, and quietly rolled back the specs so the panels wouldn't burn themselves to death. And before you say maybe it's just older models, think again. The 2026 QN85 model has already been flagged in calibration groups for identical behavior. When your flagship TV can't maintain advertised brightness for even 12 months, that's not an accident. That's sabotage, disguised as protection. The worst part is that Samsung has been fined before for misleading brightness measurements. This didn't start in 2026, it just got worse. Every time I hear someone brag about their Samsung's HDR, I wait 6 months and ask again. The answer is always the same. It doesn't look like it used to. And brightness isn't the only illusion Samsung is selling. Because once you scratch the surface, you hit the next bombshell, the panel lottery. 2. The Samsung panel lottery is a consumer trap. I've opened enough Samsung TVs in my workshop to know this company plays a very quiet game. You might buy a QLED thinking it has a premium VA panel with deep blacks, only to discover you got stuck with an IPS-type panel that looks washed out in the dark. Same model number, same box, same price, entirely different performance. Samsung doesn't just gamble with panels, they gamble with your expectations. I've seen 2 Samsungs sitting side by side, same year, same model, and the difference is night and day. One has no blooming, the other has flashlighting in all 4 corners, one has smooth motion, the other tears like a budget set from 2012. And Samsung will never tell you which panel you're getting. They refuse to list it. They refuse to confirm it. They hide behind panel sourcing diversity, which is corporate speak for, we'll ship whatever is cheaper this week. Even worse? I know one repair shop owner who documented over 40 cases where Samsung replaced a customer's defective VA panel with a cheaper IPS panel during warranty repair. Imagine buying a premium picture quality TV only to get it returned looking like a hotel lobby screen. And before you think that's rare, look up the Samsung S95B fiasco, panel swaps, firmware nerfs, misreported specs. This company has a track record of correcting mistakes at your expense. When I reviewed a Samsung unit last year, I only realized I got a good panel because I physically inspected the sub-pixel structure. Most buyers will never even know they lost the lottery until the lights go off, and they wonder why black scenes look like a gray haze. But the picture is only half the story. The real nightmare lives inside the software. Because Samsung's Tizen OS? It's not just bloated, it's predatory. 3. Samsung's software is a slow-motion failure waiting to happen. I used to think Samsung's biggest issue was panel inconsistency, until I started seeing what their software is doing to people. Tizen has become the equivalent of a slow leak under your foundation. You don't notice it at first. Then one day, everything collapses. The first problem? Forced ads everywhere. Your home screen, ads. Your settings menu, ads. Your recommendations, ads disguised as suggestions. And here's the part Samsung doesn't want you to hear. Even when you disable personalized ads, the tracking doesn't stop. Samsung still logs your viewing patterns, app habits, and device interactions. And if you think I'm exaggerating, read their privacy policy. It's a novel, but the spying is only the beginning. The bigger crime is the slowdown. Owners have documented that after 1 year, Samsung TVs take longer to boot, freeze more often, lose Wi-Fi randomly, drop apps midstream, need factory resets just to stay usable. I've personally tested Samsung TVs that lag worse than cheap $200 supermarket brands, just because Samsung pushed one too many updates onto a TV with too little RAM. You know what's wild? A software engineer in a home theater forum discovered Samsung intentionally limits app memory allocation after major updates, almost like they want you to upgrade. And if you're thinking planned obsolescence, congratulations. You've solved the puzzle. But nothing prepared me for the mother of all Samsung issues, the one even loyal fans can't defend. Because picture quality problems are annoying, but burn-in is catastrophic. 4. Samsung's OLED burn-in problem they pretend doesn't exist. When Samsung released their QD OLED lineup, they bragged that burn-in was significantly reduced. They practically danced around the fact that they had solved an issue LG struggled with for a decade. Then, reality hit. I've now seen 3 Samsung OLEDs with burn-in after less than 18 months. All 3 belong to regular homeowners. Not gamers, not digital signage, not sports bars, just normal users. The pattern is always the same. Static UI elements, YouTube progress bars, news channel tickers, streaming service menus. Samsung's own TV interface caused burn-in on one of them. Imagine that, the TV burning itself into the panel. And here's the kicker. Samsung often refuses warranty coverage for burn-in, calling it user damage. Meanwhile, calibration experts have shown that Samsung's aggressive color boosting and hyper-bright highlighting actually increase the risk compared to LG. I've tested this myself. Samsung's OLEDs push blue subpixels harder and run hotter than LG's WOLEDs. That extra heat? That's long-term degradation. That's image retention waiting to become permanent. If your Samsung OLED survives 3 years, it wasn't luck, it was a miracle. And yet Samsung continues advertising them like burn-in is a myth. It's not a myth. It's a matter of when, not if, for heavy users. And the scariest part? We're only halfway through the list. 5 the power supply failures that hit without warning. If you've never heard a Samsung TV pop in the middle of the night, thank your luck. Because I've seen more Samsung power supply failures than any other major brand in the last 5 years. And every technician I trust admits the same thing. Something about Samsung's internal power boards is always skating way too close to the edge. The pattern is embarrassingly predictable. The TV starts flickering once in a while. Maybe it turns off by itself. Maybe it clicks a few times before coming back on. Every Samsung owner shrugs and says, "It's just a glitch." No, that's the first stage of a power board dying. Then it gets worse. One day the TV takes 10 seconds to turn on, then 15, then 30. And if you're unlucky, the capacitors inside the board, cheap low-grade ones Samsung has been blasted for before, start bulging. Once that happens, your TV is living on borrowed time. I opened a 2024 QLED last month and found 3 capacitors swollen like balloons, ready to burst. The customer bought that TV for $999, thinking it would last 5 years. It barely made it through 2 birthdays. Here's the part Samsung doesn't advertise. They run these boards hot, too hot. And once heat bakes those capacitors for a year or two, they start leaking. When they leak, the voltage becomes unstable. When the voltage becomes unstable, the backlight shuts off. Then the main board dies. Then the entire TV becomes a wall decoration. And when you call Samsung support, they act shocked. They pretend this never happens. Meanwhile, repair shops make half their income replacing Samsung power boards because it happens so often. The worst story I've seen? A viewer contacted me saying their 65-inch Samsung died with smoke coming out of the back. The power board literally scorched itself. Samsung denied the warranty because there was evidence of electrical damage. The electrical damage came from inside their own TV. That was the moment I realized Samsung wasn't just cutting corners. They were gambling with safety. But if you think the internal failures are bad, wait until you see the scam Samsung built into their smart ecosystem. 6. Forced obsolescence through software updates. There's a reason Samsung pushes so many improvements through firmware updates, and trust me, it isn't generosity. I've watched Samsung TVs get worse with every update: slower menus, broken apps, changed colors, nerfed brightness, you name it. It's happened. But here's the twist. Some of these problems are not bugs. They look intentional. I reviewed a Samsung QN90A when it was brand new. Incredible brightness, clean motion. The thing was a monster. Then a year later, owners started messaging me saying their brightness looked lower. Their HDR highlights were flatter. Their tone mapping was different. Their colors were duller. At first, I thought people were exaggerating, until I measured it myself. Samsung quietly reduced brightness peaks through firmware. They didn't warn anyone. They didn't give users a choice. They didn't provide a rollback option. They simply downgraded the performance of a product people had already paid for. Why? Because they were trying to reduce the risk of long-term panel damage. And instead of designing better hardware, they throttled the TVs through software. In other words, users paid full price for a TV that Samsung intentionally weakened later. And nobody talks about the app problem. Every time Samsung updates Tizen, older TVs suffer. I've seen Netflix freeze after an update. Disney Plus refused to load. YouTube audio desync for weeks. Owners think their internet is slow. No. The TV is suffocating under Samsung's own software bloat. There was even a case where Samsung removed features entirely from older models. Yes, removed, not added. They yanked out the ability to rearrange apps. They broke local dimming control on a firmware update. They changed game mode HDR tracking without telling anyone. At some point, I realized Samsung is doing what smartphone companies got sued for, slowing devices down to push people into upgrading. But at least phones warn you. Samsung pretends nothing happened. One buyer told me his TV became almost unusable after a critical update. Samsung's solution? Buy a newer model. That message came straight from their support rep. And this is where I lost it. Because downgrading a product through software is the definition of forced obsolescence. They're not waiting for the TV to break. They're nudging it toward the cliff themselves. But all of this still doesn't touch Samsung's biggest betrayal. The one thing a TV should never fail at. 7. Samsung's motion handling scandal. No one talks about Samsung fans hate when I say this, but motion is one of the company's weakest points. And in 2026, the gap between Samsung and competitors is embarrassing. I've tested the newest QLEDs side by side with Sony and Hisense, and the difference is brutal. Samsung smears, Samsung judders, Samsung stutters, and Samsung hides the problem under aggressive processing that makes everything look artificial. But the real scandal? Samsung's motion problems get worse as the TVs age. Let me explain it the way a calibrator showed me. Samsung relies heavily on software to stabilize motion. Digital smoothing, frame interpolation, noise reduction, black frame insertion. But all of these rely on the processor staying strong over time. And Samsung's Tizen OS? It ages like milk. After a year or two, the processor struggles. The motion smoothing algorithms skip frames. The processor lag becomes noticeable. I saw a Q80B struggle so badly, it looked like it dropped to 15 frames per second during a football match. And this was after the owner installed Samsung's latest performance update. But here's the part that made my jaw drop. A European consumer watchdog found that Samsung TVs artificially boosted brightness and motion performance when detecting test patterns, similar to a cheating scandal Samsung got caught in with smartphones years ago. So what does that mean? It means Samsung calibrated their TVs to shine during lab tests, not in your living room. Real content? Blur. Judder. Smearing. Test content? Perfect motion. This is deception dressed as innovation. One father emailed me saying his Samsung made his son nauseous because the motion blur was so bad during gaming. He switched to an LG OLED and the problem vanished in 24 hours. Samsung didn't fix anything. Their entire motion system is built on shaky software legs instead of solid hardware. And as the TV gets older, the legs collapse. And at this point, Samsung isn't just making disappointing TVs. They're manufacturing disappointment. Because when a brand fails on hardware, software, performance, lifespan, reliability, and transparency, that's not an accident. That's a culture.